All right, welcome everybody. So this is going to be an introductory episode on how to do shadow work. I'm going to keep everything very simple and practical, and I'm only going to give you exactly what you need. You may have heard me talk about shadow work. You may have heard it from other people. It's an extremely important and crucial aspect of doing any kind of inner work, any kind of spiritual work, and it's pretty much the main method used to really attaining a certain freedom and liberation that I can't even really describe. The concept of the shadow is very complex. It was coined by Carl Jung, the famous psychologist. He's the one who kind of came up with this whole idea of the shadow. And there's a lot of complexities and nuances that go into it, but I'm not really going to explain all of that in this video. I'm going to keep everything, like I said, very simple, and I'm only going to give you exactly what you need in order to start doing shadow work yourself. You should be able, after this video, to have a lot of takeaways and have a very, hopefully a guide to get you started in actually doing it yourself. And I'm also going to leave you with some resources in case you want to research this on your own, which I highly suggest you do, and watch other people's perspectives and opinions on it. So let me start here. Each one of us has a sort of Jekyll and Hyde persona. We have an image that we want to portray to the world. We want to be seen in a certain light. We want to be seen as maybe intelligent, maybe nice, caring, funny, strong, sort of all of these positive traits that in our mind is what makes a person likable or liked, or is what's going to help us, progress in the world or relate to other people. We're trying to maintain a certain image. Now, it might be all of these traits that I just listed. It might be some of them, or it might just be one. Maybe you just want to be portrayed as a nice person. Maybe you just want to be portrayed as a strong person. But we all have certain things. We all have a certain way we want people to see us. But then, on the contrary of that, we have darker aspects of our personality that we either consciously or unconsciously try to hide from the world. So we have all of these positive traits and characteristics that we want people to see, but then we have these other traits that we're trying for other people to not see. Or maybe we're even trying to hide them from ourselves. So have you ever noticed how 1 minute you can feel completely calm, free of burden and worry, and then all it takes is a simple thought or a simple incident or a reminder to just completely change you in that moment. You might feel jealousy, you might feel anger, you might feel betrayal, shame, guilt, embarrassment. Typically, we're going to want to hide these characteristics or these feelings from other people. They're not something that we're usually very open about. So for example, you might want to portray this image that you're a very kind, compassionate person, very generous, very giving, but maybe you'll try to suppress or hide any selfish behaviors that you may have. And we all have selfish behaviors at times because they don't align with the image that you're trying to portray to the world. So you just completely stuff them down. You don't acknowledge them. You may not even really be conscious of them. So maybe, for example, you, inherited some money or something, or you won the lottery, and you feel like you deserve to just keep it for yourself, but you're like, no, I have to share it with everybody because that's how I want to be seen. I want other people to see me as a very generous and giving person. You might want to hide that feeling of selfishness, and you might immediately just reject it and bury it down and say, no, I have to share my money with everybody because that's who I am. That's my image. I am a generous and caring person. So your shadow are essentially all of those traits that your mind deems as negative. Rudeness, selfishness, loneliness, hostility, insecurity, weakness. There are many more. It's anything that you are trying to hide from yourself or anyone else. This was most likely shaped by your environment. If you were a young boy, for example, not necessarily, but boys deal with this the most. If you were told that you always need to be strong, you might try to hide any weakness from the world at all. You might never want anybody to see when you're sad, when you're feeling emotions, when you're crying, whatever it might be imperative for you to hide this from everybody else. That's because you most likely grew up in an environment where it was discouraged to display any kind of weakness. If you grew up in a home that encouraged you to express weakness or be honest about it in a healthy way, then you might not have weakness as a shadow trait because it's something you know how to get in touch with and you aren't ashamed of it. You aren't ashamed to display that weakness. Like me, for example, I'm not really embarrassed or ashamed to display certain weaknesses. I'm not afraid. I'm comfortable with the things the times where I feel weak. I'm all right with it. But another person who's might be trying to portray a very strong image to the world might hide those moments of weakness, at all costs. Another example that I'm just thinking of now is maybe you grew up somewhere where intelligence was really valued and like grades and things like that. Your parents were really hard on you for your grades and always trying to push you to be smart and intelligent. That might be the image that you're trying to portray to the world, and you won't show any moments of confusion or dumbness. This is why when sometimes you see people really trying to sound smart in the way that they're speaking, when you can tell you're kind of like, I don't think this person really knows what they're talking about. That could be an example of a shadow trait, and they don't even realize they're doing it. But the shadow isn't just negative aspects. It's also things that were never encouraged or expressed. So for example, let's say both of your parents were scientists or doctors and very dedicated to the field. And when you were young, you expressed an interest in art. Maybe you didn't care for science, or you didn't gravitate towards science that much. You were really interested in art. But whenever your parents would see you drawing, they would instead discourage you and say like, no, read these science books or watch this science documentary. Or maybe you wanted to major in art in university and your parents were like, no, just take all of the science and math classes. They made you feel as if your interest in art is a bad thing, and then you have repressed it. So you subconsciously ignored your passion for art and buried it deep inside of you as something negative. So again, this shadow is essentially anything that your environment has made you feel is negative and you have suppressed it. And most of the time you didn't even realize you were doing this. Sometimes you might hear something called the family shadow, which is typically those traits that I just used as an example. It comes from your family environment of causing you to repress certain things because they're seen as bad. So let's say, for instance, you live in a very devout Christian family, and when you're young, maybe you express an interest in another religion, or, like Islam, for example, and your family is most likely going to be no and have all of their judgments, and no, that's an evil religion. We only follow Christianity. It's whatever the Christians say. You have then suppressed any interest in other religions or other modes of thinking, and you subconsciously deem them as negative. And then you'll go your whole life like just ignoring other types of religions and philosophies because you've been told that only religion is the right one. That only Christianity is the right one. So, okay, I'm going to list some very concrete examples of the shadow. I have a list of about 30, and you're probably going to recognize some of these. And be careful not to deny it if you do, because one really important aspect of doing this work is being honest with yourself, and it's the mind's tendency to want to ignore or to deny the things that we have buried deep inside of us. And that's the whole key. I guarantee that even if my exact example isn't accurate for you, there probably is something very similar that you can relate to. Okay, so let's start. So being afraid to assert yourself to a teacher who is abusing you because you were told to always respect adults. You have this sort of conditioned respect for authority. Now, no matter what, adults are always right. Another one is attempting to hide your sexuality from the world. So if you're gay, you might want to hide that from the world. Not telling anyone about childhood sexual abuse because you were told adults are always right, or you're just generally hiding that because you're ashamed of it. Being afraid to speak publicly because someone made fun of your voice at some point in time. So this is a fear of judgment or ridicule that silences you. Not spending time alone because you were made to feel that that's weird. People really always encouraged community and groups in your childhood or when you were growing up. So you feel that just spending any kind of a long amount of time might be seen as strange or weird. Another one on the kind of similar to that, always needing to be around people. So you may have a deep fear of being alone. Clinging to relationships and romantic partners because you were made to believe that being single makes you seem strange or weird, or maybe you were really always pushed to just always be in relationships. And another example related to this is the opposite. Maybe you grew up in a household where you were really you had very overprotective kind of parents that just wanted to keep you in your room all the time and never go out. So now it might be hard for you to socialize, and you might struggle to actually make friends and build connections because your parents always forced you to be alone when you were young. Not wanting to speak up against or disagree with your religion because you were always told to follow it no matter what. Not wanting to open up about times you felt embarrassed or humiliated. Again, you're trying to hide that from the world. You want to hide this weakness from the world. Or trying to hide it from yourself as well. You don't want anyone to know about it. Overworking yourself because you're scared of seeming lazy or incompetent. So if you had parents that were always pushing you a lot when you were young, or just whoever, maybe your teachers or your school, were always really pushing you to do more and to do extra, you might have kind of fell into this pattern of always having to do more than you're capable of just to show people how competent you are. And if you're ever, you might be terrified of seeming lazy or incompetent. I definitely struggle with this one. Changing yourself to fit in with other people because you're afraid of showing up authentically of who you actually are. If you're a male, not doing something because you were told it's feminine, so maybe dancing or singing or something like that. Feeling too shy to say excuse me or to ask someone simple questions like the time. Again, you might be afraid of being heard or being seen, so you'll avoid talking to strangers. You'll avoid talking to people that you're not sure how they're going to react to you. Telling somebody else that they can't do something. So in this instance, you're projecting your own insecurities onto someone else. Thinking that you're ugly, being afraid of you showing your natural appearance to the world and never feeling like you look good enough. Being afraid to speak up for yourself if someone cuts you in line, for example, or maybe you were charged the wrong amount on something. Just generally being too afraid to speak your voice and speak up for yourself. Being afraid to express anger or frustration, even when it's justified. Having to drink alcohol to socialize. You're afraid of being seen authentically. Addiction is a huge part of the shadow. That's a huge shadow behavior. Sometimes when we have a lot of this repressed stuff, we'll kind of use drugs and alcohol as a way to sort of escape the pain that it causes. Procrastination, which essentially comes from fear. Procrastination doesn't necessarily come from laziness. It actually comes from fear. We often procrastinate because we're afraid of the task or whatever we have to do. Saying yes or people pleasing. So saying yes in situations where you don't really want to. Doing things just because you want to appease others. That's a huge shadow trait. Another one, bragging or showing off is huge. Note it, like when you're purposely trying to do more than you have to just to impress people and just to get them to like you. So that's the list I have. There's probably a lot more. I'm sure that you could probably relate to at least some of these. And this is where the work comes in. I highly suggest you make your own list of shadow traits that you have that you can think of. And you have to make sure you're being really honest with yourself. I highly recommend actually getting like a journal just for this. And just over the period of the next couple of weeks, couple of months, keeping that journal somewhere nearby, and because you won't notice it. Like if you sit down to do this, you might not think of everything. It might come over a period of time. But I want you to make a list similar to the one I just gave you of all of the shadow things, the things that you have repressed or that you're scared of. If you're afraid of public speaking, if you're afraid of going out of your way to start a conversation, if you're afraid of seeming dumb, if you're afraid of seeming weak, I highly suggest you make a list of those and even the specific examples if you can think of any. So essentially the shadow work is when you integrate these things. You're honest with yourself about them. So, the shadow, it can take months or even years to truly recognize all of these and to integrate them into you, to become comfortable with them and to overcome them. You have to be very patient. These things are causing you to have shackles around you and you don't even realize it. They are preventing you from being completely authentic and whole. And like I said in the beginning, this is going to be one of the freeing and most liberating things. You're going to feel like you're floating on a cloud when you really integrate the shadow and you're completely whole. You don't have anything holding you back from being completely who you're meant to be. But the more that you bury them deep down and ignore them, the more they're going to come back to haunt you in detrimental ways. They're going to come back as the time you screamed at your friend or your spouse, or for example, we're having a bit of an epidemic in the US. Young people are walking into schools and, ending the lives of students. This is a huge example of very repressed anger. And if you don't deal with that, it's going to come back in very scary and frightening ways sometimes. So basically, I think the essence of shadow work can be compiled into 3 areas: awareness, being able to acknowledge and accept the shadow without judgment. So noticing in those times when the shadow is surfacing, being able to notice it and accept it without judging it. Compassion, meeting everything that you're going through, meeting everything that you've been through, all of your shadow aspects, meeting it all with compassion and kindness is extremely important. And then number 3 is feeling. You have to face and confront your shadow, typically through physical feeling. That's why we don't want to confront these types of things. We don't want to be honest when these things come up. We don't want to be honest when we're wrong because it's extremely uncomfortable. And facing these things is it directly leads to personal growth and liberation from all of these unconscious patterns that we aren't aware of. Here's a quote from a really good book. The book is called Meeting the Shadow, but there's a quote that I really like in it. It's called, Meeting the Shadow calls for slowing the pace of life, listening to the body's cues, and allowing ourselves to be alone in order to digest the cryptic messages from the hidden world. The shadow behaviors are going to come up in times when you're not conscious of them. They're going to come up in times when you're arguing with somebody. They're going to come up in times when you feel fear, because your body is just so used to reacting to these things in a certain way. So you're not going to be very conscious of it. You have to notice when you're projecting your anger towards someone, when you're trying to hide something from the world, and you have to have compassion for yourself the same way you would a good friend. Or this is a really good exercise in these moments when you're feeling any sort of pain or emotional discomfort, is treat yourself like, imagine that the way that you would hold a small scared child. Like, you might not even say anything to him. You might just hold them to give him that comfort. Do the same thing for yourself. Picture yourself as this small, little scared child. Picture yourself holding you and consoling you. You have to kind of do that for your inner child, for yourself. And that's a really good thing that you can do in these moments. You have to be willing not to run or hide from these shadow traits, but to face them and feel them when they come up. Watch my videos on the letting go technique to have a more specific instruction on how to do that. You have to really get in touch with your body and the way that you feel, and not so much worry about the logic behind it or why it's happening, but just really get comfortable feeling the discomfort that comes. So here are some examples of situations where the shadow is surfacing. Notice when you project. Projection will be the biggest sign of the shadow starting to surface. So for example, maybe you criticize someone who is lazy, even if it doesn't really affect you, because maybe you're scared of seeming lazy. And especially if it really bothers you. Just making simple observations isn't necessarily always the shadow, but maybe someone you know is kind of lazy lifestyle, and it just really triggers you and bothers you. This could be possibly an example of the shadow within you trying to surface. There's some sort of repressed thing. Maybe you are very scared of appearing lazy, or maybe you are lazy and you're trying to deny it. You don't want to be honest with yourself about it, right? And you'll notice, because it'll be very exaggerated feelings about other people. So like another example is maybe someone is wearing kind of an odd outfit, and you're ridiculing their outfit, or you get very emotional about things that don't really have any effect on you. So somebody wearing a different outfit or wearing some kind of strange clothes, it doesn't have anything to do with you, but it could be possibly a projection of your own insecurities. But again, just because you make simple observations about other people doesn't necessarily always mean it's your shadow. So here's another situation. When you receive negative feedback from others, even if it's constructive. This was actually a huge sign when I was healing, because I hated any kind of negative feedback or constructive criticism whatsoever. But now I can actually take it and accept it, and it doesn't bother me at all. Another situation, notice your impulsive acts. So making an impulsive sexual joke, for example, that could be a sign of repressed sexual desires. Because like I said, these things come out very unconsciously. So maybe you shouted at somebody, you got really angry at someone. That can be an example of some sort of repressed anger you have in you that you haven't really dealt with, you haven't healed from. Notice times where you feel embarrassed or humiliated. That's a good time to get in touch with yourself and to try to understand why you feel embarrassed or humiliated. Notice when you have a freeze response to something, or you're trying to hide or run away from something. Notice the times where you get triggered by other people's actions and behaviors. It's important in times like these that you take a step back. So for example, you want to impulsively make a decision. You need to get better at taking a step back from that and not always acting on the way that your body naturally wants to act upon things. You have to be willing to slow down for a second, become aware of what is happening, and sit with it. So another example, you want to prove yourself right in an argument, just let it go. It's most likely because you always have to be right. You've never felt heard or seen, maybe. Notice that. You have to start making those connections in these moments. But most of the time we're living on such autopilot, so unconsciously, we don't really sit and think about these things, You have to be able to feel without judging yourself. You have to be able to let these things happen without having any kind of harsh judgment. As I mentioned before, you have to have a level of compassion and just understand, because the more that you're hard on yourself, the more it's probably going to try to suppress everything. And you have to be able to let all of this surface without being hard on yourself, even though it's sometimes we will gravitate towards that. But it's really important to view everything sort of objectively, as it's just something that's happening. And that's how you'll truly heal from it. So here are some personal examples. So even with recording these YouTube videos, right? Like, I was afraid in the past to look down and read my notes because I wanted it to seem like I had everything together and I knew everything, and I didn't want it to seem like I was talking about things that I didn't understand. So I wanted to just kind of like be a really confident and competent speaker without having to look at anything. And I was always jealous of other people that were able to do that, right? Jealousy is another huge example of the shadow trait. You have to notice in the times that you feel jealous of something. And another one for me, I was always afraid to speak publicly. Most people will just go their whole life avoiding this fear, but you want to be careful not to do that. You don't want to avoid the things that you're scared of. It's not about the actual thing. There's usually just something deeper there, and it's usually an opportunity to heal. You want to work on overcoming fears like that, especially things that will benefit you in a lot of ways. So certain fears, like, extreme sports, for example, that's not necessarily a shadow trait. That's just you're scared for your life. Things that aren't threatening your health or your life is something that those are fears that you want to overcome. So anyway, for me, I started working as a server in a restaurant, and that was a really good opportunity for me to kind of push myself to speak more publicly, because I would have to go up to tables of like 10 or 15 people, and I would have to practice really, speaking clear and loud, even if it made me uncomfortable. See, I pushed myself to do it anyway. The freedom that you can get from this type of work, it's not like anything you can ever find in the world. It's not like anything you could find from material objects, from relationships, from any of that stuff. This is like absolutely the best gift that you can give yourself. Like I said, you have these shackles on you, and they are holding you back from showing up authentically. They're holding you back from really truly living the way that you want to live. The other interesting thing is when you start doing this work, you'll have more compassion for other people, because you'll start having more compassion for yourself, and you'll start seeing that it's just a scared little child inside of you. That's all that these types of situations are. All of your fears, your projections, your jealousy, it's just a little kid inside of you that's wanting to be seen and heard. And now you start seeing that that's how it is for everybody. Once you start getting in touch with your own inner child, you start seeing that everyone else is just basically acting like a kid. I mean, the good thing about this work is that it really matures you. It makes you very intelligent, and it makes you handle life so much better. Your connections will be stronger. The way that you treat people, the way that you treat yourself. Think about it. It's the reason that we aren't living the life we truly want to live is due to fear most of the time. So instead, we'll just deny those fears, or we'll project onto other people. But when you can start really overcoming those fears, it's going to create the life that you truly want, whatever that might be. We all have different goals and aspirations in life. And it's not just about like the external circumstances. It's about the way that you feel. I say all the time, those external circumstances are somewhat irrelevant. It's the way that you feel in all of these situations. And you want to become comfortable embracing whatever situation you might be in, whatever the external circumstance is. You want to be comfortable embracing that. I think that's all I have for today. This was a pretty long video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm sure that there are things that I'm missing. This is a very introductory sort of episode. I'm going to post some resources below of things that I think you should check out. I definitely think that you should make this a priority in your work. I think that it'll be extremely beneficial, and it's enjoyable. It really is, because you could start setting little milestones for yourself, and you're going to see how much better you feel and how much you are improving when you start doing this. So, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and please feel free to let me know. If you have any questions, reach out to me in the comments. You can email me. Let me know what you guys think, and I really appreciate you being here.